There are lots of concerns about why the scandal happened. We have a lot of campaigners out there who've been doing the hard graft over years as well. And those voices are really important. What's really critical for me as well is to hear the voices of victims, the survivors, and the changers, because I've seen where those voices have been rightly amplified, change can happen.
Well, I'm here with Reverend Clive Foster, newly appointed Windrush Commissioner. Hello.
Hello, Michael.
This is a special podcast we're doing today because it's one specifically for Black History Month. So please, you could find time to come in and speak to us. I know you're busy and you're rushing around all over the country.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I know we've done a podcast previously, totally different subject. That was following the disturbances last summer. Who'd have thought that things have actually got worse? But anyway, you've got a new position, very high profile, high powered position. We're really, really pleased for you, Clive. Do you want to tell us what it is that you're doing, what the position is?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for those congratulations. My role, I was appointed in June as the first Windrush Commissioner for the UK. That appointment was made by the then Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, and it's really about how we can start to get some positive outcomes as a result of the Windrush scandal.
Okay. We hear this term, the Windrush generation. Can you just explain that to me?
So the Windrush generation can be defined, I guess, as after World War II, many people from the Caribbean came over between 1948 and 1973, and they were deemed the Windrush generation, come to really rebuild UK, and they came as a result of the shortage and the labour requirement, and many of them from the Caribbean came here to work in the factories and in the mines. They actually came on a ship known as the HMT Empire Windrush. And as a result of that, they were coined the Windrush generation, as it were. So my own parents came over in the late 50s and 60s, and many people from the Caribbean got that term, the Windrush generation.
Another term that we hear quite often associated with Windrush is the Windrush scandal.
Yes, so the reason why that is because back in around from 2017, sadly, what happened was many of those people who had the legal and moral right to be here, because of what was then called the hostile environment policies, trying to control immigration, were wrongly classified as illegal. This then came to the fore, and there were people who were wrongly deported, wrongly detained, or wrongly denied access to services, losing their jobs, and suffered a loss of dignity. And when this broke, it was mainly affecting people from the Commonwealth, particularly people from the Caribbean. And they became known as the Windrush generation as part of the Home Office scandal. When that scandal broke, it became known as the Windrush scandal. And subsequently, it's now termed as the Home Office Windrush scandal, because of what happened to those people, and it's something which my role is seeking to redress.
What sort of impact has the Windrush scandal or Windrush Home Office scandal had on the impact? Could you give some examples of what's happened to people?
It's been very devastating, I have to say. Sadly, there were people who were, if you just think about, you saw this country as your country, you've worked here all your life, you've contributed, you've paid your taxes, and then to be told that you can't prove, if you can't have documentation to prove yourself to be here, then you will be deported or detained or denied access to services. So we've had examples of where people have been wrongly detained. I have sadly supported people who were detained on a number of occasions because they couldn't prove their documentation to be here. And then people who have lost homes. But one of the big things is just the sense of betrayal and the lack of sense of belonging to the country, having given most of their lives to it as well, and the indignity of that. So it's been very powerful and very hurtful, and that's why the government had to take serious action to redress that injustice.
So, I mean, obviously, a big thing in terms of what the government is doing to try and readdress that is your appointment. Is there anything else? Or?
Yeah, sure. So what the government did, Michael, as a result of the breakout of the Home Office Windrush scandal, it did a number of things. First of all, it recognised that the wrong was done and a route needed to be created so that people could have the right documents to prove their lawful right to be in the country. So they set up the Windrush scheme. This meant that people who were caught up in the scandal did not have to go through the normal routes of paying to get the documentation to prove that they had the lawful right and the legal right to live and work in the country. The second thing that they did in 2019 was to establish the Windrush compensation scheme. Now, we know that, money can't solve all the problems, and no amount of money can compensate for the devastating loss people have experienced. But the scheme was set up and designed to, as it were, compensate people who suffered real losses, financial losses to whether that's their homes or their work, and also the impact on the life. And the last thing that the government did was to do a review known as the Windrush Lessons Learnt Review by Wendy Williams. This review produced 30 recommendations as to why the scandal happened and what is some of the cultural changes the Home Office has to do. And so that is a review which the government is now looking to implement across the Home Office.
Thank you. Right, let's focus specifically around your particular role.
Sure.
What is the purpose of the Windrush Commissioner?
Yeah, well, I hope it has a real purpose and it's going to be effective. So the purpose of the role, the Home Secretary, actually the Commissioner, the Windrush Commissioner, is a Labour manifesto pledge. So they had it in their last manifesto that they would, as a result, if they came into power, they would create this role as the Windrush Commissioner. And there's a few things that my role, the brief that I have, what that role is. Number one, I'm to act as a trusted voice for the victims of the Windrush scandal, also to act as a voice for those Windrush communities and also organisations that have been impacted as a result of the Windrush scandal, to listen to those voices and those concerns and bring that to ministers and to those people in the Home Office as well. Secondly, I should act as an authoritative voice to scrutinise the government with regards to the progress or not it is making on its promises to ensure that the Windrush scandal doesn't happen again. Then also my role involves about making recommendations and advising on the compensation scheme to make sure that it's fairer and faster and swifter and working for those people that it needs to. And then also to be looking at the cultural change very much through the Wendy Williams report, the Windrush Lessons Learnt Review, and the 30 recommendations, and what is the progress that's been made there.
Clive, I came along to Acne when you had the event, when you were first appointed, and brilliant turnout, a lot of positive energy there. You mentioned some of your first early steps that you're going to be taking. How's that going? How have you been getting on with all of that?
Yeah, well, that was a really important moment as you were there to launch that event. So some of the things that I'm looking at is, one is to make sure that on the compensation scheme that people get the actual losses that they've really experienced. So things like the pension losses, things like future earnings. So that's something that I'm really pushing forward on. Secondly, what I've come to understand as well is that sadly, many people who were affected by the scandal are senior in age. And I'm very concerned that the processing, the way that processing is done when claims are made, it doesn't take into account that time is not on people's side. And also sometimes some people have health conditions. So sadly, what we do know, and sadly, we know that 66 people have died when they should have had compensation. So I'm pressing to make sure that there are looking at how we process things that are coming in. And I'm also looking at the importance of what having a more trauma-informed response and support to people who are going through the processes as well. To actually come again and explain what you've suffered is very re-traumatizing. So, and that is becoming a very strong concern that I'm hearing when I'm going around to communities, to sit down and try and explain again. And sometimes when people feel that the person they're explaining to is not understanding them from a cultural competency point of view. So I'm very much pushing around having a more trauma-informed response to supporting people as a result of the launch that I did back in Hackney.
Thank you. The announcement of the Commissioner's office has had a mixed response. Do you share any of the concerns that have been raised, and how do you tend to address them?
Well, I can really deeply understand the mixed response to the office of the Windrush Commissioner. I think we just really have to accept that the Windrush scandal has deeply hurt and has caused many injustices for communities. And so there's been a long-standing kind of, as it were, struggle for justice in this area. And so I can understand the skepticism. But I think what's going to be really important is that there is a continuation, and I would even say a resurgence to get justice for those who have been affected as a result of the Home Office Windrush scandal. And the remit that I have is to be independent, to act without fear or favour, and to say what the situation is, because I am responsible to be a trusted voice for the victims. And so that's what I will be seeking to do, and I'll be seeking to work with organisations and communities that want to do that, notwithstanding the reality of the pain and the injustice that communities have experienced. But I think what's going to be important now is to take on the, as it were, the work for justice and for healing and reconciliation, but most importantly, that justice is seen to be done for the Windrush generation and anyone affected by this scandal.
All right. Just going back to the your launch event in July, you mentioned a listening tour.
Yes.
How's that been? How's that gone?
Yeah, so that's something that is already happening. I've had the privilege of going to Wales and to Scotland, obviously in London. Just last week just a few days ago I was in Leicester, not far from here. And I'm going to Northern Ireland next week. So the listening tour has been very illuminating for me to hear the stories, to hear the obviously the stories of where people feel that they haven't got the service and the response. And that's been very powerful. And also to hear and to see what's been very warming for me in this role. Because I guess I came into it kind of knowing, Michael, some of the pain and the suffering and the injustice. But what's been also, I have to sort of share and say, what's been very warm is to see those Windrush first pioneers very proud coming out, talking about the contribution that they've made. I've seen veterans and they've come to meetings and they're wearing the medals.
Oh, wow.
You know, and it really has touched me to see that level of dignity and commitment alongside working with people who want that justice as well. So the tour is ongoing, and I'm looking forward to listening to people and taking that into my conversations with the Home Office.
That's excellent. What are the short and medium-term plans?
Well, I have written to the Minister and set out a number of things in my letter in terms of the short term. So, one of those things, as I mentioned earlier, we really would like to see a change in how cases are processed. In the short term, again, obviously, following up on the listening tour, that's going to be very vital. So we're currently doing that as well. And we're looking to make sure that we are dealing with some of those cases which we know comes out sometimes in the media and having a proper response to that. You may have heard of a case involving a lady from Ghana who was unfortunately could not, 80 years old, lived in the UK for 60 years, has got cancer, went to Ghana and could not come back. And then so my office actually had to intervene. She was out there for 4 months. And so we just raised the voices of that concern through when it became to our attention and managed to enable her to come back. And I say that because in the short term, I am listening very carefully and picking up some of the big concerns. And one of those concerns also that's coming up is around people who are outside of the UK and cannot get in. And they, when you start to look at their cases, they should have a right to either come into the country and potentially also access compensation. So those are some of the short-term things that I am addressing and looking to work on. And it is something which I am currently doing. And I guess, lastly, the other short-term thing I'm doing is trying to build a team because you can imagine this work, is a lot of work. And so we're currently recruiting some more personnel to build up the actual office of the Windrush Commissioner.
Right. But I just want to pick up a couple of things because you talked about, obviously we spoke earlier about the listening events, but then you also mentioned raising the voices, and that is really important, isn't it? That you can amplify those voices.
Yeah. It's critical because in some ways that's my first remit. Look, there are a lot of concerns about why the scandal happened. We have a lot of campaigners out there who've been doing the hard graft over years as well. And those voices are really important. What's really critical for me as well is to hearing the voices of the victims, the survivors, and the changes, because I've seen where those voices have been rightly amplified, change can happen.
What support, Clive? What support would you need from the general public to assist you?
I think that's a great question. I think there's a couple of things. I think, first of all, I would like to say to the public that the Windrush scandal is not over. It is still alive. There are still many people who are suffering because of an uneasiness whether to come forward and prove their status. People need to understand as well, this is really important. One of my priorities is to ensure that anyone and everyone who's entitled to get their status settled through the Windrush compensation scheme comes forward. It's critical to explain to the public that the Windrush scandal, the Home Office Windrush scandal, affects people from across the Commonwealth. So it's not just people from the Caribbean. It is people from, it's undocumented Commonwealth citizens is the kind of a term that you can use. So that's people from India, Nigeria, Ghana, Zambia, Pakistan, Canada. So, and also as well, if you were lawfully settled in the country before 1988, it's anyone in the world. So it's a big issue that we need to understand here. Also as well, what I would like to say to the public is to be having those conversations about your lawful right and status. Think about your whether it's your brothers, your uncles, your aunties, your grandparents. Have they got the paperwork? What's their status like? And people who may have had some problem trying to prove their status, to say that the compensation scheme is still open. And it's important to get that across. The compensation scheme is still open. and to become aware of that and engage in that process for their eligibility for that as well.
Thank you. My final question, what's needed to prevent injustices like this being repeated?
I think that's a really great point. I think there needs to be a collection of a number of things. I think there needs to be just an acknowledgement and a recognition of the dignity of people who have come from all over the Commonwealth to make Britain what Britain is. Mm-hmm. And that's around respect, dignity, and doing the work of justice. And I think that's going to require cultural change, and that's going to require leadership. It's going to require leadership, and it's going to require the governance to do that. And so I think in going forward, one of the things I'd like to see about my role, but this is something which broadly anyone could make a contribution to, is to ensure that justice is delivered. Justice is not delayed, because justice delayed is justice denied. That there is healing and recognition of a wrong that has been done. And that there is a recognition of the legacy and the contribution of the Windrush generation and their descendants to this country. And I think moving forward on those fronts is going to be very important for the sense of justice and fairness to the Windrush generation and anyone who's been affected by the scandal.
Well, Clive, thank you very much. Thanks for coming in. And if I could just say, on behalf of Communities Inc. and the people of Nottingham, and we know you've got a national remit and you're here, there and everywhere, but we're really, really proud of you. We think you're the right person in the job and wish you every success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael.